Are you ready to transform your home with these inexpensive and creative trash to treasure home decor ideas? They're perfect for achieving that cozy farmhouse look. Hey there, my name is Sandra and I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started.
We are going to take this $4 clock that I got at Dollarama and turn it into something fantastic for farmhouse decor. The battery pack and the parts on the back do pop off, but before I could do that, I needed to cut out the plastic so I could easily remove the hands on the front. That was something that didn't come off very easily. So I'm just using my miter shears, and then I'm going to use my utility knife, and I'm going to be very careful and break off that plastic and then slide out the hands and the whole system all at once. I'm going to use one of these MDF pieces. There were 6 in a pack for $4, so that was a huge steal. And my local Dollarama was carrying those along with some 9-inch rounds. I'm also going to be using these wood garden stakes that I pick up at my Dollarama as well. It's $1.25 for 10 pieces, and I believe they're balsa wood. Super easy to cut, but they're much thicker than the jumbo popsicle sticks, and I really love using them. They're so easy to cut and form into whatever shape you need. I'm marking off how I'm going to need to cut them to make a frame around the outside of the 10 by 10 board, and I'm just going to be using my miter shears to make those cuts. So here I've got my pieces cut for the border, 2 long pieces on the top and the bottom, and then some shorter pieces on the sides. And I'm just going to use hot glue and glue them right onto the board. Once I've got the frame in place, then it's time to work on the angled pieces. So if you haven't figured it out already, I am making a barn door. And this is kind of tricky. I always mess this up, so it's a good thing I had a lot of extra pieces. What you need to do is make sure that your angled pieces are sitting on the bottom and the top, not the bottom and the side as I originally did with these cuts. So here's what I mean. I cut this side piece at the top, and I don't want it there. I want it to be like at the bottom and then at the top, not at the bottom and the side. So at the top here where this final arrow is where you want that angle to be. So I'm going to need to start my cuts all over again, which is okay because it's a learning process, and you know what? That's just how things go when you're crafting. So here now I'm marking the bottom and at the top, not on the side. So this is finally going to turn out, and again, I'm just going to use my miter shears to get those cuts done. So I've actually turned the board now, and you can see that it looks like this piece is going to be on the sides rather than the top and the bottom, but I've just turned it a quarter turn just so it's easier to glue these pieces in place. I've got the board turned right side again, and now I'm going to be cutting smaller pieces. So it's going to have the angle on the bottom and then a cut to match up with that middle piece. I'm going to again hot glue it in place and then repeat the process for the other piece on the top left corner. I've done barn doors like these a couple of times, and I still get confused each time I do it. So take your time, make sure you're cutting the right angles, and if you mess up like I did a couple of times, don't worry about it. Just start over, and once you get it done a couple of times, you'll be able to figure it out too. So now I've got to work on my little clock mechanism here, and I need to very gently take off the clock hands because the clock needs to come from the back to the front, and of course the hands need to be on the front. So with needle nose pliers and being very gentle, you can just pull it off very easily and just set those to the side. I've just laid down a scrap piece of wood because now I'm going to take my drill and drill a hole from the top down so I have somewhere to place the clock mechanism in through the back. So I've got the hole drilled and it fits through really well. Unfortunately, it's just not tall enough. I've made the base and the extra pieces of wood a little too thick, so I've got to do some little finagling in the back to make it work. I'm tracing out the back of the clock, and then I'm going to take my utility knife or my craft knife and just make a whole bunch of scoring lines all the way up and down and then crossways to make a grid. And that's going to help me just pull off some of those pieces. I'm also going to then use a screwdriver to try and pry some of those pieces off. And then eventually I go to coarse grit sandpaper and sand it down quite a bit. I get about 1/8 of an inch of the MDF board off of the back, which is just enough to let the clock sit a little bit more higher to the front. I'm going to add some of these tumbling tower blocks to the back of the board, and that's going to help elevate the board itself so it'll lay flat against the wall when it's hung because the clock mechanism sticks out from the board. I got these tumbling tower blocks from Walmart before Christmas. It's an actual full-size tumbling tower or Jenga game. So these are extra large blocks and they work out really well. I used 12 of them all together. I'm going to use my linen white chalk paint from Rust-Oleum and a nice soft nylon brush and give the clock 2 coats. The front, the back, the sides, everything's going to be solid white. So here's everything dry and painted white. I think it looks absolutely beautiful. I just love it. So what I'm doing with my square from the Dollar Tree is just going across the center to mark where I want to put my numbers. So I'm going to put in 3, 6, 9, and 12, and I'm just going to mark with a little pencil dot so I know exactly where to put them. And then I'll repeat that for the 12 and the 6. At first, I thought I would use my Cricut Joy to put these numbers on, but then I thought, you know what, I can freehand these really easily. I'm only putting the 4 numbers on. So I'm taking my pencil and I'm just sketching out how I want them to look. And then I'm going to go over them with my Sharpie fine point pen. I'm going to continue using my Sharpie fine point pen and do some embellishing on these numbers. I'm going to thicken up the downstroke, so wherever your pen goes down, that will be a thick line, and when it comes up, it'll be a thinner line. Once I was completely done the clock, I ended up taking my Craft Smart paint pen and making the numbers a little bit thicker so they would stand out more. Of course, this is a farmhouse clock, so it has to be distressed. I really like the white, but it looks so much better when it's done being distressed. I'm taking a soft brush and some dark gray chalk paint and just bringing my brush from the edges into the center. And that's going to put some color right on the edge and then also bring a little bit of feathering right onto the top. I'm going to do this on all of the raised edges, and in a moment you're going to see me turn my project. I always try to make it more convenient for myself instead of struggling and trying to get my paintbrush or my arm to turn a different way. I turn the project instead. So it just makes it a lot easier to get the same effect all the way around if your brush and your arm are in the same angle. So here you go. You can see that I just flipped it over, and it's just going to make it so much easier for me to do the same type of strokes if the project is turned around. Using the same brush and still dabbing off some of the paint, I'm just going to distress all of the white. So I'm just going to go up and down and sideways and make sure that everything looks kind of uniform, but kind of not. I like to go pretty lightly at first so I can see how it's looking, and then it's always easier to add more paint than to take paint off. So keep that in mind when you're painting. Just go lightly at first, and then you can deepen the color as you go. Once I was done distressing the whole part of it, I decided that I wanted those edges to be a little bit deeper, so I'm going to go over them one more time. Then I did the same thing on all 4 edges, but I didn't worry about the back because it's going to be hanging on a wall and you won't see it. I'm going to use a generous amount of hot glue to glue the clock mechanism right onto the board. Now it's time to grab the clock hands and gently press them back into place. Make sure that they're going to move. That's one thing I was concerned about this, that maybe I didn't have enough elevation on the clock, that the hands might not move, but it turned out pretty good. It also has this little black piece that gets popped into the very center, and there are my hands. Good to go. The last thing my barn door clock needs is a hanger. I decided to take a piece of nautical rope. I tied a knot in each end, cut off the excess, and then hot glued it into place. I decided to replace the clock in my bathroom with this barn door clock, and I am in love. I hope you like it too. This mirror unit I found at a thrift store for $8. It's pretty heavy with the mirror in it, so I have decided to remove the mirror and just use the frame itself. The first thing I'm going to do is remove these screws that are holding the mirror in place, and I'm also going to remove the hangers and the paper backing. The mirror comes out really easily, and I'm just going to set that aside. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with it. Here's what it looks like on the back. I'm going to clean up a little bit more of the paper and get it prepped for painting. The previous owner had put in these cup hooks and also another hook on the side. These are in really super tight, so I had to use my needle nose pliers to get them started so I could remove them. When I get wood items from a thrift store, and pretty much any item, I like to use disinfectant wipes to clean off all the surface. It gets all the dirt off, any of the grime. Then I let it dry for a few minutes and it'll be ready to go. I'm going to use this crack shot spackle just to fill in the holes from the cup hooks and those two little screw holes in the corner. I'm going to use Rust-Oleum chalked paint in linen white and just a regular dollar store brush, nothing fancy. I don't mind getting some brush strokes because I will be distressing this at the end, and I'm going to make sure I get into all of those cracks and crevices. This project needed 2 coats. I love the look of the linen white, but I need to do some distressing. No farmhouse project would be complete without it. I'm using Folk Art chalk paint in the color Maui Sand, which is a beautiful charcoal gray color. And I'm going to use this rough brush and just flick the brush across the edges. And that's just going to accentuate all of those ridges and those little corners and grooves, and it's going to look absolutely gorgeous. I'm also going to go around the outside edge of the window frame and make sure I do some on the bottom shelf too. While I'm distressing this, I wanted to share with you that this video is part of a collab that I am hosting with 4 other YouTube friends. We love to do thrifting and flip our thrifts and make something old into something new. So I'd really appreciate it when you're done watching my video if you'd go down to my description box, click on that playlist link, and check out what Vesna over at Vesna TV is doing, Jamie at Simple Roots Simple Living, Pat from Pat's Home Craft, and Cindy, that crafting lady. The last thing to do is add some hangers so the person who gets this in their home can hang it on the wall properly. I like to use these self-leveling sawtooth hangers. They're called sawtooth hangers because of the ridges, and they're self-leveling because there's lots of space for you to adjust your nail. I always need to hold my tiny little nail to attach these in my needle nose pliers because my fat fingers won't hang on to anything properly. But it just helps me get that nail started, and I do that on both sides. This was a super easy project, and I really love how it turned out. I found the majority of the items that I'm going to be working with today at the Goodwill. And for this beautiful crate, which looks almost brand new, I paid $2.99. I believe it would be for a bottle of wine, but I decided to make it into some farmhouse decor. I'm going to paint both of the sides and the inside of the sides with white, but I'm going to leave the slats on the front and the back in the wood color. I just like that combination of the white with the wood. You'll have to let me know if you like that combination too, or if you think I should have painted the whole thing white. I thought it would be fitting to use this Devonshire Clotted Cream IOD stamp, and the ink that I use is just from a dollar store. I've seen this ink in different areas, but I know that Walmart carries some good ink. You don't have to spend $20 or $30 on an ink pad. You can buy one for $5 or $6 and it will work just as well. I'm going to use the same one on the other side, and it was really easy to get these centered because I put the points of this stamp in the middle of the slats on either side. So it turned out pretty good, even just with me eyeballing it. I paid 50 cents for this milk jug. It's not vintage by any means, but it's got some neat labels and it has a cow on it. So what I'm going to do with it is just take my DIY chalk paint. I'm not going to water it down or anything, but I'm going to pour a decent amount inside the bottle and then just roll it around so the paint covers the inside. And that will make it look like it has milk in it. Then what I'll do is just turn it upside down and let the rest of the paint drain out. Now, just be aware that paint, when you do this on the inside of a bottle, it usually takes a couple of days for the paint to dry completely, sometimes even 3 or 4 days. So just be aware of that before you start adding any decor to it. In my opinion, I think this is the best way to paint glass bottles or jars, and you get that nice glossy finish on the outside from the original jar, but then you get any type of color that you want to pour in on the inside. This is what it looked like when I put these two together. I got a set of 4 of these canisters for $10 off of Facebook Marketplace, and they are huge. This is the third largest size. You know how canisters come in a set of 4? Well, this is the third largest. So there's even one that's bigger than this, which I haven't done anything to yet. These cow prints on there are sweet, and maybe 25 years ago I would have had them this way in my kitchen, but I'm past that and I like more of a rustic farmhouse look, not cutesy. I just put some masking tape all the way around the frame of it. And I did make a mistake here. I forgot to add some spray sealer to this shiny surface first before I started to paint. So when I started removing the tape, I did have a little bit that wanted to come up a little bit. It started to peel up, but I just fixed that with some Mod Podge at the end. So just a couple of coats of DIY chalk paint in black, and that will just cover all of these sweet little cows up and make space for a nice label. You'll be able to see here in a minute what I meant about some of the paint starting to peel off with the tape. It starts on this side and I get a little chunk out of there, but I was able to just fix that up afterwards with some paint. Make sure you seal it with something. It could be even some Mod Podge. That would work great as well on the slick surface. The first thing I did was take my Cricut and cut out just on some cardstock this stencil. That didn't turn out the way I thought it was going to, so I repainted the label black. And now I'm going to go ahead and use the letters that came from the cutout of the stencil, which are on cardstock, and add them to the label. So while the paint is still wet, I'm just going to be adding all of the letters. And then once the paint is completely dry, I'll add a really good coat of Mod Podge and make sure that those letters are stuck down perfectly. I also added these little laurel leaves that were part of the stencil too, and I think this is really a fun way to just get something on there. It's just like putting on some stickers. To clean up the edges of the label and where the paint did peel off just a wee bit, I'm going to use this marker. It's a glass marker. I picked this up at a dollar store. I can't remember which one, but it works really good on shiny surfaces. So I'll just use my ruler and then just straighten out all 4 of the edges. A tip that I can share with you is make sure you wipe off your ruler every time you use a marker, because that marker is always going to be on the ruler and you don't want to make a mistake and add it to a part of your project that shouldn't have any black on it. Every kitchen table needs a napkin holder, and this one does double duty because it's also a salt and pepper shaker holder. Now, it is a darker wood underneath. I had spray painted this a long time ago when I did a big batch of spray painting in the summer, and it's been waiting to get a completed makeover. So what I'm doing now is just adding one really good coat of DIY chalk paint, and that will just freshen it up and make everything look the same. I'm also going to be painting the bottom of this piece. If you've been with me for a while, you know that I love printing on tissue paper. I create my designs and then use a piece of tissue paper taped to a piece of regular printer paper and then send it through my printer. If you're not sure how to do that, I do have a link for my tutorial video on tissue paper printing down in my description box. I always use matte Mod Podge. That's just something that I buy in bulk. And I'm going to put a generous amount on here. Not tons. I don't want it to be dripping, but I want to make sure that the whole area that I'm putting my little labels on is completely covered with Mod Podge. That will just make it easier for me to go on top of the label and smooth it out. What I like to do when I'm videoing for you guys is I take my paintbrush and I pick up my piece like that. Now, I wasn't able to do it this way. I had to turn it around and put it on upside down because I wanted to be able to get it in the right spot, and I also wanted you to be able to see how I'm doing it. So I just place it down and then very gently start pushing from the center out, making sure my brush has a good amount of Mod Podge on it. If your brush is too dry, you take the chance of maybe tearing the tissue paper, which is not something you want to do. I'll do the same thing for the S on the other side, and this project is done.
I hope you enjoyed these incredible thrift flips and DIY makeovers that turned everyday discarded items into stunning, budget-friendly decor pieces. Thanks so much for spending some of your time with me today. See you in the next one.